Hi, this is Robert Scheer with another edition of Scheer Intelligence. These days I'm doing it well, not just, we're on Spotify, Apple, and everything else, but no longer with NPR because they kind of gotten under a lot of pressure, I think, from the Trump administration. So it's one of the signs of the time, but we're still here doing it. And I'm talking to someone who I feel I have spent almost all my adult life, hearing about him, encountering him, almost seeing him, and so forth. I just learned in setting this up that he and his wife worked in my campaign when I ran for Congress in Berkeley. We were students at Cal. I was a graduate student. I'm 89. Greil is 80. But I must say, we haven't been on parallel tracks. Let me read what's been said about Greil. The Washington Post, the New York Times, one of the epic figures in rock writing. I'm reading this stuff because I believe it. By the way, I'm not, I'm actually a little bit intimidated doing this because, frankly, I come out of big bands. I'm 9 years older, and then when I was at Berkeley, I really wasn't interested in Elvis Presley or anybody. Or I will even tell a little story about Bob Dylan, but I went to the jazz workshop. I really liked San Francisco for the jazz. And one of the people I knew then and knew later when I was doing Ramparts, Ralph Gleason, was the first person to talk to me about your writing, Grill's writing, with great admiration. And Ralph was a person I admired his work in that field. But anyway, the Washington Post said Marcus is our greatest cultural critic, not only because of what he says, but also, as with rock and roll itself, how he says it. And I agree with all that. It's really powerful. And one of the reasons I like doing this show is it forces me to revisit books like The Mystery Train, Images of America in Rock and Roll Music. Let me hold that up. That's the purpose for this discussion now. So go get it if you haven't read it. Even if you read it 50 years ago, as I had, you'll find it really great, holds up very well. A more recent book that impressed the hell out of me was, I guess, a talk you gave at Yale, right?
The first part is a talk I gave at Yale. There are three chapters about things that formed me as a writer: my absent father, Pauline Kael, and seeing Titian's Assumption of the Virgin in Venice one day, and how that destroyed everything I thought I believed.
Yeah. Well, your father died in the war, right, or right after the war?
No, he was killed in the um, Great Typhoon in December of 1944 when his um, battleship went down and 400 men were lost on his ship, 400 more men on two other ships.
Yeah.
And he was the executive officer, he was second in command. The other officers asked him to take command, put the um, put the commander under arrest, take control of the ship, save the ship in the typhoon, because the commander had no idea what he was doing and he was leading them into their deaths. And he did not lead a mutiny. Um, and he, along with 400 other men in his ship, died.
Oh. So you're kind of born with an investigative story. What
Well,
happened?
yeah, I was born 6 months later. I was given his name.
No.
That's right.
And then Pauline Kael, for people who don't know her, we were at Berkeley at the same time. As I said, I'm 9 years older, so I was a graduate student and TA. In fact, I even had Abby Hoffman in one of my classes. And at that point, he was still somewhat conservative. He told me to beware of drugs, but then that changed pretty quickly. But Berkeley
He should
was
have taken his own advice.
That's true. But Berkeley then, he got this reputation for being, so open and everything. But we were just chatting about it earlier. Berkeley during the 50s was, as now, public universities are particularly subject to McCarthyite or any kind of attack on academic freedom. And Berkeley suffered at the hands of the state legislature, federal, and so forth. And many of the finest professors there had either been fired or quit in protest. And then I was certainly surprised that because I was warned when I went to Berkeley it would be suffocating and predictable and boring. And then the students took over, and it turned out to be something quite different. And then I guess you came along. When did you start at Berkeley?
63.
63. And at that time, you mentioned Pauline Kael, and there was two movie theaters, the Studio and the Guild or something.
Right on Telegraph Avenue.
Yeah. And
Yep.
that's I knew there was the Thalia in New York, so I had seen on 96th Street or something, Broadway, old French movies, Italian movies, which really were great, and a total different perspective and content than American films. And when I got to Berkeley, that's what the Guild and the this Pauline Kael and I guess her husband, and she was yeah, and she was a major figure. That whole scene was wild, and it's interesting. We both, in a way, came out of it or shaped by it. And I want to get to the heart of this discussion in that regard. Uh, we went different ways. I did an AI to see if we had any connection. And AI instructed me, oh, yes, we had these parallel careers, and I was political, ran for Congress, as you say, you worked in a campaign, and I did ramparts and everything. And you became, and I don't think it's an exaggeration, the most important interpreter of the significance of rock and roll and what it meant to America and continue to be. You have Substack, you've written a large number of books, and so forth. But I was thinking, I actually conducted my own life trying to not be swept up in it. Maybe because I was a bit older, maybe because I was political. And I just want to mention one thing in that I wrote it down here somewhere. Yes, Publishers Weekly said at bottom, this was the one you did on Bob Dylan. Said the bottom, it's the story of the desire for freedom in all its unruly and liberating glory. And he calls you a founder of the contemporary rock criticism and his most gifted and incisive practitioner. And then I thought about this, the unruly, yes, but I think the political track that I was on had the conceit that what we were preoccupied with was justice, some notion of justice. Yet we only got the megaphone that we got because somehow we got involved with this whole rock scene. I remember Kezar Stadium as a kind of seminal moment. I looked up some of the clips, and some said 100,000 were there, and the New York Times cut it down to 50,000. But it was, I remember I was shocked at the size of this crowd. Largely had to do with bands. Not everybody came, and in fact, folk artist Joan Didion, not Joan Didion, Joan Baez had been quoted in the Examiner that week saying, "Don't go. This will just to show support for the Viet Cong or something like that." Then she changed her tune, but there were others there. So much so that when I finally got introduced as the editor of Ramparts, my opening line, because people were already leaving, the bands were gone. Now we're going to be political, and I said, "Oh, well, now that we're alone, let's address this war issue." Because now at least a third of the people had gone. And I just thought about that connection between the rock scene, the cultural scene. Let me just babble on a little bit. For me, it started really with the San Francisco Mime Troupe. And I remember their first benefit that Ronnie Davis and others put on, and I went to that. And Ronnie, we happened to have a chopped liver sandwich at David's Delicatessen, two New Yorkers. Then I got on his Vespa, and we went up to see whether anybody was going to show up. And it was a concert with Jefferson Airplane, and I forget the other bands that were there. I think the Loading Zone. I forget the others. And he said, I don't know if there's going to be anybody there. They were doing this benefit. And we got there. The line was all around Potrero Hill, all around the block and around the block. And I remember, it was Bill Graham, not Ronnie Davis, Bill Graham, who was working with the Mind Troop, and he on his motor scooter, he turned to me and he said, "This is the business of the future." I'll never forget that line. And he was off to the races. He went and rented the Fillmore soon after, and so forth. So that they were connected. There was energy, San Francisco, where you were. So take it from there. Really, what was the connection between the whole rock and roll scene and what was happening and this political explosion?
Well, look, I was a student at Berkeley. I got there in the fall of 63. One of my deepest memories, something I've gone back to so many times with a sense of wonder, is going downstairs to the commons room of my dorm when I was a sophomore at Cal in in early 1964, in January of 1964. I had read in the paper that there was a British rock and roll band called the Beatles that was going to be on Ed Sullivan. I didn't know they had rock and roll in England, so I was kind of curious. And I went down expecting that there would be an argument, as there usually was, over what to watch on the one Commons Room TV. Instead, I go down there, there are 300 people there, all waiting to see the Beatles. And then we saw the Beatles, and then we started yelling and talking and screaming and wondering what in the world this was and what it was all about. And going upstairs to my dorm room, turning on the radio, hearing one Beatles song after another. And then this older guy seemed much older to me when I was 19. He was probably 23, but he seemed like he was 40. And he said, just as our generation was brought together once by Elvis Presley, it may be that it will be brought together again by the Beatles. I mean, he really talked like that in this oracle like manner. Well, he was right. He was right. And that sense of solidarity, that sense of people recognizing themselves, that sense that people had of living in a special moment in history was something that grew and grew and grew. Now, what happened later in 1964? 9 months later, the free speech movement broke out, and that changed the campus forever. It changed the University of California at Berkeley forever. And it certainly changed almost anybody who was involved in that movement forever in many, many different ways. So I still carry that with me. And there was just no difference, there was no separation among the people I knew, and certainly myself, between what was going on the radio and what was going on in Sproul Plaza, as Mario Savio and dozens of other people stood up every day to give speeches protesting the university's banning of political activity on campus, which is what the free speech movement started as a protest against, and grew and grew and grew over 3 months. And it caught up everybody. So, to me, in my own writing and my own thinking and the arguments I've tried to make over 55 years, there's no separation. Those, what what people were doing with the songs that they listened to, and what people were doing in the marches they went on, and sometimes the much rougher protests they got involved in, we all got involved in. There was no separation. There was none at all.
Well, then let me bring up a figure that I noticed you only mention Jan Wenner, the founder of Rolling Stone, once in the Mystery Train, kind of an incidental reference. And yet, you basically started working for Rolling Stone. I think what, a couple of years, and you were the forget the title. You had a
I was
title.
the records editor. I started writing for Rolling Stone in 68, a year after it started. Jan and I had known each other since we were both freshmen at Cal and are still very good friends.
Ah. So what was interesting to me is that Jan also worked at Ramparts, which, by the way, started in Menlo Park, where you came from, and then we moved
That's
up
right.
to San Francisco, and we were on Broadway. In fact, right near the Jazz Workshop. Go there every night after work, and uh, he. They started Rolling Stone as kind of a page in our daily Ramparts.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
During
and
the newspaper strike.
yeah, and I remember Ralph Gleason, who was on our board, a great jazz critic, and but very open to all kinds of other music and everything, was very supportive of the start of Rolling Stone. But again, not and Ramparts was a mixed bag. I don't want to go into that, but not everybody in our office was excited about this. It's because they maybe were a bit older or what have you. But again, Ralph Gleason was middle aged and he went right for it. But the real concern is the commercialism that was also built in it from the beginning. And the Beatles obviously were a great commercial success. Was that going to kill its spirit? And of course, you've written a lot about that. What the spirit itself was not simple; it comes in different forms. What it meant is very complex, and what have you. But I guess the idea of selling out, of commercialization, was central to that debate. I used to hear that all the time in Berkeley, just by virtue of wearing a tie when I try to do fundraising with people in the business world for Ramparts. And but you're suggesting there was no such tension at that time.
I'm saying that there were people did not perceive that we were talking about or living in two different realms with music over here or art over here and politics over there. That was not the life that I led and not the life that anybody I knew was leading. um, talk about selling out, talk about Rolling Stone. One of the things that kind of shocked me as a reader before I started writing, and I was reading it religiously because it was the first time there'd been a publication about rock and roll that was actually intelligent, that actually tried to think, that had ideas that weren't obvious, and that was literary, that was well written, it was edited, it was meant to communicate. It was not just somebody blathering on about their acid trips, which, by the way, Jan started doing when he was a sophomore at Cal in a column in the Daily Cal. Unbelievably terrible column. Um, but in any case, um, here's Rolling Stone in its first few months struggling financially. Jan is going around the country knocking on the doors of record companies, trying to get them to buy ads in the paper, the only thing that would keep it afloat. And here is an issue with the hottest band in the world, Cream, British band, on the cover. Inside, a huge ad for their new album. Facing the ad, a long column by John Landau, a full page. John later went on to become manager of Bruce Springsteen. He'll be you'll be able to see him fictionalized in the movie Deliver Me from Nowhere, where he plays Bruce's manager, which he still is. But in any case, here is this long piece by John Landau slamming the new Cream album as a fraud, as a waste of time, as a complete misunderstanding of the music it pretends to address itself to. It was this absolutely scathing takedown. This is an example of a magazine that started out biting the hand that fed it.
Yeah, no, I'm not taking anything
And
away.
that was thrilling for readers,
Yeah.
and it was thrilling for people like me who wanted to write and didn't know how. It meant here is a place where you can say anything if you can do it in a way that's forceful and convincing and interesting and has passion in it. I said, I want to write like that. I want to do that.
Well, since we're talking about writing, just so I mean, one reason I do these interviews is to try to get people. I still teach at college at USC, so I'm interested in what 18, 19, 20-year olds read and think, and so I want I want them to read Mystery Train because I did a little survey, and unfortunately, they didn't know about the book in class yesterday, nor had they seen this one that I want to hold up, which I don't know. First of all, I love the fact that it's so short because when I get to do these shows, sometimes the books are 1,500 pages or something. But this is a wonderful essay about writing and about what inspires writing and why it's a craft that has to be taken seriously, but it's complex. And it's, I guess, began as a lecture at Yale, as you said, and but it's what nails it. And I guess this, yeah, you can buy it because I saw it on. I don't want to say Amazon, but I guess you can still find some independent bookstore. But you can get it both of these books on Amazon, and I want to recommend it again. Getting back to the original question of selling out and what is integrity, and that's the as I teach now, that's the main issue. You know, are you supposed to just worry about which billionaire you're going to work for, or so forth. One of the optimistic things about the rock and roll story is that you can, in a way, take their money and bite the hand that feeds you and have a meaningful career. And sometimes we used to have at least some fairly enlightened capitalists who understood these contradictions and understood if you're a publisher. It's why I went to work for the LA Times for 29 years. The Chandler family, Otis Chandler decided I could add something to the mix. It was something readers at the time I was younger readers might be interested in. So I had a great run and I didn't feel any pressure. I also wrote for Jan Wenner when he had Look magazine or something. I did a piece or two for him and found it a good experience. So I'm saying there's an optimistic view here that good writing, a good description, uh, whether it's about justice or the quality of music, will take place because people want to hear it, they want to read about it. But again, getting back to the example of the success of the music, I remember going. You can correct me on the year, but Bill Graham, who I knew through the mime troupe, here's another example of somebody who managed to make money, but also I think be very good for the artists. I guess some might disagree, but my experience, he was very good. But anyway, he got me backstage to meet the Beatles when they came to the Cow Palace. Do you know what year that was?
Would have been 60, um, 64 or 65.
Huh. So, so I took my at the time my sister-in-law's Susie, who was 16, and I never had an experience like that. I thought I was happy to be there and backstage, but we actually met the Beatles. Thanks to Bill Graham and so, and she came unglued. She just couldn't speak and so forth. So
I'm
there,
not surprised. I wish I'd been in her shoes.
and well, it was interesting because yes, but I was suspicious of the celebrity factor and what is this going to do to people and so forth. And then it was an incredible irony because it's sort of at the very end of my time at Ramparts, we published John Lennon, and I don't know if when Working Class Hero came out, which it's an album I couldn't stop listening to over and over and over again. Maybe it has something to do with my own background or something. But also, we ran, very good piece about the movie about his opposition to war and his moving over. And suddenly, those two worlds came together in a very, I felt, very important way. You probably have a different view and know more about it. But do you remember that? Uh,
I remember that, yeah, but I think to me, John Lennon entering into radical politics in the early 70s, um, that kind of thing was less meaningful than making music. He and the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan and dozens of other people at that time addressing themselves directly or most often indirectly in an allegorical or metaphorical way, melding words and music to say there is a different life possible. The life that's on sale is not the life you have to live. You can buy it or you can not buy it. That's what people were hearing. And so there was a much stronger, I don't want to use the word message, there was a much stronger meaning in the music that people were listening to than somebody simply standing up and singing a song against the Vietnam War or racism or anything else.
well, obviously that's true. I mean, and it took a long time to stop the Vietnam War because it was difficult to, get people to, you know, well, it's difficult to stop any war because there are other songs that can be sung that celebrate them or other speeches that can be given. But well, just before I drop since I do respect your expertise so much, I did, aside from what movements it created or not, I thought the Working Class Hero album, do I have the name right?
Um, it
Or is
was it was the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band album, 1970 or 71.
yeah. But there was a spirit in it that I felt very strongly because I thought, what is this journey that I've been on? I mean, my parents were garment workers, my father was a machinist, all that stuff, and uh, I also felt, okay, I'm a success, I'm becoming successful, you know, uh, but there was inherent contradiction and not, of course, nothing, tiny bit of success compared to what someone like him had. But the words resonated with me. Maybe that was just very personal, but I thought there was an examination of what it means to be involved with. Well, let's use the word an enormously powerful capitalist society that is bent on improving the bottom line, and we see it now with a vengeance with the billionaire class. I mean, it's what the internet has unleashed. And they buy up all the media now. It's not just a self made person, which, after all, the original Chandler was, or Jan Wenner, but now they can just go in and scoop up all of these things. So, let me throw that one at you.
Well,
Uh,
I mean, let's talk about the song. Let's talk about Working Class Hero. I can hear that song in my head right now. I can hear it clear as day. I
it's
can hear
something to be. A working class hero is something to be.
Yeah, I can hear the melody, I can hear the rhythm, I can hear the words, I can hear the hesitancy that goes into the singing, the irony, the cynicism, the anger, the fury that is contained in the very quiet way that John Lennon is singing that song. The anger, the resentment that he had to grow up working class, that people made him out to be a hero of his class when he wanted to live in a world without classes, as anybody from the working class would want to do. He's singing as somebody who never escaped the identity that his society imposed on him, regardless of his honors, regardless of his fortune, regardless of his fame. He was saying, you never escape. You can never get out of that. But to me, it was a tone of voice of regret and resentment that carried its own meaning, its own argument. It wasn't the specific words, it was a sense of regret that around 1970 and 71, all kinds of people who had gone through the previous few years with a sense of righteousness, a sense of being in the right place at the right time, of having history on your side, of fighting the right fight, were suddenly faced that maybe the future was not going to work out that way. And you could hear a lot of that in that song too. So, you know, the, any good piece of music is going to carry many meanings in different ways. And they're all really there. They've all been put there by the person who's performing or the people who are performing the music. And depending on who you are, you will hear part of that. You will hear some of it. And if you're a writer dedicated to throwing yourself at this music and letting the music seep into you, maybe you can see a little more and lead people to understand that what might seem like entertainment, a pastime, something trivial, something that will not last, is as important as anything you might read in the newspaper and will stay with you possibly much longer.
Well, I that was yeah, that's what my whole point is because I forget all the words, but he says they fool you with TV, they fool you with sex, they fool it was all about false consciousness and what they then expect you to do, and we're seeing this a lot with the current right wing populism, right? I mean, we're in a scary, at least I feel we're in a very scary situation now, and whether you go as far as to think we're Germany between the wars or something, but it's a frightening time, and I think that particular song was warning about that. There's a limit to the power that you will be granted. I know this is going to sound like old Telegraph Avenue Berkeley talk, but there's an illusion that you're going to be free. There's an illusion that you're going to have power, that you're going to have a redress of grievances, that you're going to have a fair chance. And here was this incredibly successful person, uh, unbelievable, the most successful, you know, human being on the planet at that point in terms of rising up and getting all the new toys and the money and the recognition. And it was a warning that I think applies now to the kind of populism that we're dealing with. That you think your advance, you know, is going to be carry everybody with you, and that it's real. And his basic line was, "They fool you with this illusion of success." I don't know. Maybe I misinterpreted the whole thing, but
Well,
it
see,
resonated with me.
this is why it's interesting to talk about. This is why it's interesting to write about. That song came out of a time when John Lennon was living in New York. He was involved with political people, and he was picking up all kinds of ideas about the iniquity of the consumer society, about, as you say, false consciousness, about the way people are lulled into believing that what's being done in the world is for their benefit, that they have a voice, that people care about them when people don't listen and don't care about them. I think that the ideas in that song, Working Class Hero, and the lines that you quote, they're secondhand, they're received. It's like somebody being told about false consciousness for the first time. That's a big idea, and it's a strong idea. And when you're first exposed to that notion that your consciousness may be false, that it may be manipulated by other people and not for your benefit, it can seem like a revelation and it can inform everything around you. And so you write a song about it that encapsulates that critique. And that's what John Lennon did with Working Class Hero. But to me, the words of that song were false. They were another kind of false consciousness when you are receiving ideas from other people and other sources that suddenly seem to make sense of the world, but in fact only make a certain kind of sense. But it liberates you as an artist, as a speaker, as a citizen, as an ordinary person to begin to think for yourself and feel in your heart what your life has been about. So when I listen to that song, what I hear is the tone of voice. And I think there is a, if you want to use the word message, stronger in John Lennon's tone of voice in that song. A working class hero is something to be. The sense of regret, the sense of having been used, the sense of not knowing who you are, and whether anything you've ever done is worth a dime. Well, obviously, it's worth a lot more than a dime, worth your soul. All those questions come to life in his tone of voice, in the way that he sings so slowly, in the way that nothing in that song is dramatized, nothing is pushed. It's almost like an apology for having been fooled. So, you know, that's what I do. That's the way I listen. That's the way I try to write. I try to hear what's going on in the song in all the different ways that something might be happening.
Yeah, and you do it brilliantly. And I mean, you've taken to me to school on this, and I'm still going to listen to it. I haven't stopped listening to that song because, and as I say, I didn't make too many dimes on this, but even at my advanced age, I think, what am I doing, and does it matter, and will it work? I mean, those questions that well, I can't speak for you, but I thought that group we had in Berkeley and on other campuses and so forth, this whole matter of selling out and what is your soul and what is your integrity, were decisive. Now, maybe it was also because we knew there were some good jobs waiting and there was opportunity, or maybe some of people came from
Hey,
a more
Bob,
privileged.
listen, I remember reading you about the joys of flying first class. You used to
Yes,
write about that just wonderfully, right? When you
yeah,
were working at Ramparts.
yeah. I'm not
Selling out. You
that.
you live your life. People criticize Lennon for having good suits. You know that?
Yeah.
And he
Well,
said,
actually, in our old
I have
friend
to look good. This is my job.
in our old friend Steve Wasserman, who was a student of yours, he just has a book came out, and he's got a chapter in there of how well, actually, it was the first suit I think I had bought since I graduated high school. But I forget the name of it. It was a place on Telegraph that had good clothing, and I had bought a not a very fancy suit, Pierre Cardin. But my point is a slightly different one for our time now. Uh, and where do we get ideas from? Where do we get inspiration? Let me just take up somebody you've written about as effectively as anyone has, Bob Dylan. And uh, I remember his original name was Zimmerman, right? Was it also Bob Zimmerman or something?
Well, Robert,
Yeah. So I was happened to be around that time when we were at Berkeley, but after I left graduate school, I went to work at City Lights Books, and I was selling books there because they took away my fellowship in the Center for Chinese Studies. So Lawrence Ferlinghetti gave me a job, and there were some people from Minnesota. One of them had a tragic ending off the Golden Gate Bridge and so forth, but they had been friends of his. So he came to the store, and and he wanted to thank Lawrence Ferlinghetti because Ferlinghetti had been reading, and then Zimmerman had been reading at some poetry thing. For some reason, it was the Gate of Horn, but I'm not sure. It was in Chicago, and Ferlinghetti actually later said, "Well, it didn't go down that way," but yes, he was there, And he came very late in the program. Ferlinghetti came high in the program. And Ferlinghetti then, according to Zimmerman Dillon, Ferlinghetti stood up and said, "Hey, the best poet tonight is now reading and you're not listening to him, or he's speaking." And so he was there to thank him. And so that was great, told the story. Then he went down and saw Lawrence and so forth. And this, I think, was just when the Columbia album came out, if my memory is right, because they told me it was coming out and so forth. And so obviously I followed all that. And here was someone who was not in the Presley mold, right? Obviously was shunning that and was developing somewhere between the folk and what have you. And you have evaluated and interviewed and described. So, and then he's now in different, has gone through different stages. Can you, uh, if you just, you can refer us to your book, or you can, but what are your thoughts about it?
About what?
About Zimmerman turned Dylan and his impact and all the things you've written about rock. It's a good time to sort of some. We haven't really talked about the book that I thought I was here to help people to buy, Mystery Train, and the whole origins of it. It's not specifically the Dylan period, but which you've also written, but
Well, let
really,
me read you something. The last page of the book, where there's a little author biography, says in 1963, two events took place that have shaped his life ever since. In August, at a Joan Baez concert in New Jersey, she brought out a singer who sang a song called With God on Her Side. And on the Monday of the week that President Kennedy was assassinated at the University of California at Berkeley, he met his future wife, Jenny Bernstein of St. Paul, who had already heard of the singer he hadn't. Hearing Bob Dylan sing that song at a Joan Baez show in a field in New Jersey, where she introduced this dusty looking person whose name I didn't catch. I'm sure she mentioned it, but I didn't hear it. And he sang this song With God on Our Side, which rewrote American history from all the common textbooks that people read in public schools through the 1940s and 1950s and 1960s. He rewrote that textbook and cast the history of the United States in a completely new way. Well, hearing the way he sang and what he sang, that just set me off. And I've been listening ever since. And I've never ceased to be surprised by what he's done. That to me is a great adventure. That's a great privilege to be able to live your life, anyone, alongside the life of a great and long lived artist who continues to challenge himself, you, and the world by looking at it and rendering it in different ways. So he's still doing that. I mean, what a shocker. In 1922, just when everything was shutting down from COVID all over the world, he comes out with a 17-minute song that starts out being about the Kennedy assassination and ends up in the middle of Allen Ginsberg's Hydrogen Jukebox, with every song you ever wanted to hear being called out to some celestial disc jockey to play. Nobody could have expected that, but there it was. So, being able to travel through all these decades with someone who has never lost the facility to see the world and describe it in a different way, that's that's a great gift. And I've written about that gift.
I've taken a lot of your time. What have I left out? Uh,
Well, everything we might ever talk about.
the reason I look, first of all, it's taken me a long time to get to talk to you. Uh, I think I think of you as the great. Okay, not my inclination to flatter anybody, but you're a big hero to me. Even though this is our first conversation, and you're not alone. I mean, you mentioned some name. Alice Waters comes up. I have great respect for her. Michael Pollan's another one who comes out of that Berkeley crowd. It was Tom Luddy or somebody else. I mean, these maybe not.
All people, well, not Michael Pollan, but Alice and Tom were, Tom was a very, very close friend and a huge presence in my life. Alice continues to be.
So what I'm trying to evoke here, though, is in some ways I was a spectator because I was older. I mean, I don't. I obviously played a role, but by the time and I came out of a much grittier background in New York, and well, I was a little bit more angry. And I'd also gone to Vietnam as a journalist, so it wasn't an abstraction. I had seen something of the war at a critical point, and I went to Cuba in '61 at the time of the revolution. So I saw, what the government can do, how information can be distorted, how the New York Times can get it wrong, and so forth. But what is really amazing about that period is it threw up a number of people. A guy named Frank Bardicke is another one who got very
Frank
involved.
was a good friend of mine. Yeah.
And another hero of mine. This guy. I mean, he lives near Salinas now. He lives. I went to his house recently. Haven't talked to him in decades, but there he was. His friends are farm workers. This is not an abstraction. Just like Alice Waters is still concerned about the right way to teach about food in the schools, and she actually, she's here in L.A. occasionally. I run into her. It's like Alice Waters was 50 years ago, your 50th anniversary of your book. She happened to be my campaign manager in that campaign that you worked in. And
She talks about your campaign. I've heard her say this so many times that one of the well springs, one of the sparks for Chez Panisse, the restaurant that she started in 1971, that is still right where it was, that your campaign was the spark for that restaurant that showed that people had to live different lives. They had to affirm values in any way they could. That Chez Panisse is a reflection of your campaign and her involvement in it. She said that over and over.
well, I appreciate that. But what I'm trying to get at, and if you give me a few more minutes, we're at a time of where cynicism has been is out in the open in the crassest, most brazen way of justifying, basically inhumanity. You can do anything you want as long as you're on top, as long as you're a winner, and so forth. And as I say, I came to Berkeley kind of accidentally. I wasn't expecting a culture. In fact, I thought a lot of it had been killed by McCarthyism. And then there was a sudden flowering in that area. Part of it had to do with California. Part of it, you live in Oakland. The history, there had been a strong labor movement. There had been, strong civil rights consciousness in Northern California, certainly. There had been the Beats, which I don't think they get enough credit. You mentioned Ginsberg before, but I know when I got there, I wanted to see the Beats. I want to know what that was all about, and again, central to it was this idea that your life has to have some meaning beyond that, getting that home, having this career, leading this bourgeois life. It had to have something. And even somebody like Bill Graham, who's enormously successful as a business person, uh, had that. He had that sense, and now he had experienced personally what had happened in the Holocaust to some degree. He knew something about a lot about the real world. But what I find now, teaching in college and being around, young people want that. They want that sense. They know the game is rigged in some ways. They know it's rigged, but they're not getting it. They just get a heavy dose of this is how you make it. Use this app, do this, brand yourself, and so forth. And what I find so powerful about what you've written is that you treat these artists, these practitioners, even the business people associated with considerable respect. That they are like even what you said about John Lennon, that his life is a work in progress, was a work in progress, that he was struggling with fame, was struggling with what is he really doing, who is he really, and certainly Dylan is another example. But I think that's the theme. If I could summarize your writing, and I spent a couple of weeks now reintroducing myself to things that I miss, you actually are the prophet of an artistic integrity. I don't want to put too heavy a load on you, but you have really searched for and found the highest meaning in what otherwise could be thought of as just an exploitive commercial business or an amusement or a distraction, right? As, for instance, Elvis Presley is commonly thought of, and I don't think you invented this, you found it, right?
It just comes down to a question. Why is this moving me so much? Why is this not like anything I've ever experienced before? What's going on here? Why does this seem to matter so much? And you try to answer that question, you address yourself to that question, whether it appears in a novel you're reading, a song that you're listening to, somebody's face on TV, a scene in a movie where a person moves in a way that doesn't seem ordinary, that seems off and out of place, that shifts your attention and creates an image that will never leave you. You say, why is this happening? How does this work? That's all I've ever tried to do, is address that question. And to me, it's a question that never gets tiresome, that I never get tired of. That's that's it.
And one doesn't get tired rereading it because you make that the main purpose of your writing. It's not to get sales, it's not to impress some editor, it's not to be trendy. You are actually investigating. You're actually an investigative journalist. I hate to put that load on you,
I'll
but
take that.
seriously,
That's a
uh,
great compliment. I love that. Thank you.
all right.
Thank you.
No, let's end on that note. And unless there's something else you want to, let me
No,
just say one little thing, because
yeah.
I exercise in this condo I live in here. It's one reason I'm functioning at 89. I do, you know, 3 4 miles according to my Apple Watch every day, and so on. And the only way I get through it is to put on some music with my AirPods and so forth. And I happened to come across some reference you made to in your book to Leonard Cohen, and forget the specific reference. It was about oh, I know, Suzanne, the song, and someone sang it differently.
Well,
Right?
Randy Newman had a very brutal song called Suzanne, and he liked to introduce it by saying, "This is not Leonard Cohen's Suzanne. It's on a somewhat lower moral plane." I've never been a fan of Leonard Cohen, so I really appreciated that.
Okay, now I am a fan of Leonard Cohen, and I don't have your authority in the field.
There's
My
no
favorite.
authority. You're moved. I'm not.
Okay, but my what I love well, there's one line. There's a crack in everything, and that's how the light comes through. And it seems to me, and I'm not saying he's the only one that gets into those contradictions, but to have a line like "I'm the little Jew who wrote the Bible," which I forget what song it is in. That there's a again getting back to John Lennon. Maybe I have a gloomy view of things, but there's I don't know. I just it's funny because I got that from your book. I thought, well, what am I? Yes, you're right. It moved me. He moves me, and so I'll let it be that. Yes, it's up for grabs, and but you're the authority, so I
I'm
felt
not the authority. I just write about what I hear. Other people have other things they do.
yeah.
It's a false authority. If anybody thinks I have any authority, I'm not trying to tell anybody what to think or what to like or what not to like. I'm
Well, you
just
paid
saying
me.
this is morally corrupt.
Yeah, but you paid me a compliment
This
before. Let
is,
me pay you a
this
compliment.
is a new
You,
way of looking at life.
yeah, but you're doing better than that. You're covering a field in which everybody, well, there are a lot of people hustling, right? I mean, I notice even just doing interviews like this, I get, oh, write about this book, write about that book, and everything, and so forth. I've been doing, I've been on the other side as a journalist, covering candidates, I deal with PR people all the time, and clearly, in the music business and entertainment and the movies, it's incredible. If you want them on the cover of your publication, you want the photographer, and we want to pick this photographer, and we want this angle. Come on, I've lived this
Sure,
life. I mean,
sure.
I've interviewed lots of. In fact, for one of my old Berkeley girlfriends, she had Premiere magazine. Susan Line. I've written, wrote some of did Tom Cruise for her and so on. So I've been around this business. What I love about your writing is fundamentally unassuming. It is not at all seem to be. I mean, it seems to be splendidly indifferent to what kind of audience you might appeal to, or whether you're trendy. And you're covering a business where being trendy and successful is often the name of the game, and you seem to be oblivious to it. Whole way the prose flows, the whole attention to details of different kind, the introducing us to complexity. Maybe you can do that for Foreign Affairs magazine or something. You're not supposed to do that in the music business. And having spent now a couple of weeks immersed in some of your work as a writer or a would-be writer, I'm blown away by it. The integrity of it. I mean, I didn't, I'm not trying to give you a pat on the back or no, far from me. I mean, that you need it, but seriously, the whole stance that you've adopted and that you own is one of an insistence on no bullshit. I'm not playing that game. I'm not doing it. I'm telling you as you put it, what I hear. And if there's some way I can pass that on and pass you on as a role model to the 18 or 19-year-olds I teach, I'll certainly have them listen to this podcast. One of the main reasons I do podcasts to get people to listen to this. But just ending this, I think you're an incredible journalistic, intellectual, whatever role model.
Well, Bob, I was reading you long before I ever published a word, and that stayed with me too.
Okay, guy. Take care. Hopefully, I can see you in Oakland when you get there.
I'll be there.
Let's go to Alice's restaurant together.
You bet.
Okay. Take
Anytime.
And that's it. I want to thank Joshua Scheer, by the way, who insisted on doing this. He picked up it's 50th anniversary. I have to do that. He's our producer as well as my son, Diego Ramos, who runs Scheer Post, where this will also appear, as well as all the other places, and Max Jones, who saved us at the last minute. Left his role as producer of the Chris Hedges Report to step in, and hopefully this is all going to work out technologically because I found it really great. So see
Well,
you next week with another
my
edition.
thanks to everybody too, and especially to you. It's great to make contact finally.
Take care.
Bye
So,
bye.
yeah.